not good. But they think it's worse to be too low because the leader always tries to reduce the anxiety of the organization, and you go to technical fixes, such as, oh, why don't we try to compromise on this situation? Why don't we avoid taking on this tough challenge? Why don't we do a Bible study about it? Those are all sort of work avoidance issues. Now you could do a very good Bible study that continues to put the pressure on. But what they're shooting for is the place in between too high and too low. And this is what they call the zone of productive equilibrium. Zone of productive disequilibrium. Okay? And this is when people feel the urgency and the need to change, and you stay with that middle zone. And see, this is what the church avoids all the time. Why? Because you don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. You don't want people to leave. You want everybody to love everybody. Okay? That's not going to work if we're going to tackle some of this innovative changes that you're going to need to work on. In fact, Heifetz and Linsky purposely rile up people in their work. We were in a group of about 85, and they're all world-class consultants, educators, high government officials. Superintendents of Boston schools was in our group. And they just go around and say, why do you need to talk so much to all of us? I mean, people have these problems, and so they just call people out like that. And really make them really upset. But what they were doing was they're upping the urgency about the change that needs to take place, not in just the group, but within ourselves. Heifetz went up to this one woman from Puerto Rico who does a major leadership for the whole country. And he just pressed her, and she started coming back about, well, you're being racially insensitive, et cetera, et cetera. He says, that's nonsense. She got really offended. She shut down the whole couple days. But then, in the end, they try to tell you, that's the way we work. Because we want you to feel a challenge. Otherwise, you coast on your authority, because these were all high authority figures, by the way. All right? So, this zone of productive disequilibrium is something that we've got to tackle. If we're going to change it all, we've got to not be afraid of loss and casualties, but the innovative part of this is in this zone. If we start going back to technical fixes on things, nothing's going to change. And we're just sort of work avoidance. Okay? So, here, let me give you an example. Color of rugs. Work avoidance is, it's got to be green because it's been green for 50 years. Well, green does not turn on young people. We've got to change to some color scheme that's going to be consistent with younger generations. No. Okay, so the whole church is split over the color of the rug. And we laugh at this, but you know it's true. That is work avoidance, folks. They're arguing over something so silly that adaptive people would point that out immediately and say, why are you guys fixated on this when the deeper problem is the power struggle that's going on inside of you, in this group. That's the one we got to tackle. I don't care what the rug is, but let's use that as dealing with what's going on in this congregation. And then the anxiety raises, right? Because I'm getting called out. We're not avoiding the work. We're in the zone of productive disequilibrium to the point that we can really settle some of these long-term differences that we've had and to really talk about it and name it. So they talk a lot about diagnosing what your congregation, the culture of your congregation. What is that culture that's going on in there? If you can figure that out, then you've got an idea of what you need to keep, give up, and then move to change. Does that make sense? It's really not that hard, and their formula is really pretty simple. It's hard, though, to stay in a high conflict situation. But remember, if it's too high, it's not productive. If it's too low, which is where we're at all the time, it won't work at all. We take the safe route. And that's even in this annual conference. Let me call out our annual conference. Notice the amount of time we spend on maintenance issues like budgets and pensions. And in fact, some of you were really concerned about the fact that I think Bruce may have said inadvertently, it's more important that the pastor's pension is covered than making new disciples, was the reading that some of you got out of something he said. Well, that's an example of work avoidance for the whole church. We have a technical fix that's getting in the way of our fundamental problem. We're not reaching new people. We're not reaching younger people. We got to tackle that head on, okay? And that's a complex issue. All right, go ahead.
I hate to always be saying something, but going back through my past of 40-something years, 30 years of my own ministry and plus of being a pastor's spouse. So what I'm seeing here is yes, but what I don't see is, well, what is the answer to what happens? Are they saying it's okay to go ahead and bust hell wide open to get what you want? And another example of my childhood was a conflict in a church where a man came in with a gun to shoot the pastor. You know, you'd think that would have made me run from the ministry, but I have my own situation right now, and I'm looking at, I can understand a lame duck president. In other words, you see, the question was, are you able or willing to handle the circumstance?
Right.
You know, and so you get to a point, as we get older, we get to a point, are we willing to go through busting hell wide open, in other words?
Okay.
You hear what I'm saying?
Sure. It's the safe route always for the leader to take the easy way out, which is to just go with technical fixes and reduce the anxiety of any organization. That's the easy way out. But that's not the Jesus way. Jesus disrupted the system so much that he lost his life. And so the adaptive folks talk about this all the time. The leader is going to get assassinated at the worst. You're going to get marginalized. You're going to get thrown under a bus. You're going to be character assassinated and scapegoated. All of those things are what's in store for the leader who keeps up the conflict and pressure. And we've got to accept that. Right? But that's Jesus' model. He so disrupted the order. He called in question the economy. He called in question the politics. And he called in question the religion. And everybody was after him. But God had a different story at the end. And the story was, that's leadership. That's me. That's God, actually. That's God's best. All right? So it's not going to be easy for any of us. Laity leaders, clergy leaders. Julie's point was, you may get assassinated at the worst. I doubt that's the extreme. But at the minimum, the system is going to try to disempower you, make you seem like a crank, you name it. The system will do that to leadership. Yeah. David.
Bishop, you know that leadership is about asking really good questions. And can you give us any pointers on how we as leaders might diagnose some of what's going on in our local situations to say, okay,
sure.
When they're dealing with the color of the carpet, to say what's really going on here?
Sure. That's the name of the game, is that you intervene and say, it's not about the color of the carpet, folks. It's about what cultural values are going on in this argument. And it depends on what the church context is. Sometimes it's a long-standing feud between two people who have factions. And this is another thing, you got to deal with factions in the church. how you constructively help those factions. So it really depends on the context. But let me give you one for the annual conference. Why do we talk about Native ministries all the time? It's a core value of us, but we don't do much about it. We really don't. I mean, why don't we do more commitment to Native ministries as a conference? I've always wondered that. I'm at fault as much as you all. So that's the tough question for this annual conference. We speak the words, but our actions don't follow them.
Then you have to question whether it's a core value.
Exactly. Well, it's an espoused value. Everybody says that's in our top three, but nothing gets done about it. Or we just say, Charlie, you go do that. Charlie can't do it by himself. Until some of us as a faction move into that area, then something's going to happen. Otherwise, we just mouth the words. Yeah, go ahead.
It's because we're the perpetrators. And
We're the perpetrator, okay?
And we're afraid.
Cool.
Because even in Charlie's message to us, we all were able to experience an element of shame for his story.
I hear you.
The shame of the fathers is upon the daughter. And so when I myself am working with men and women in a homeless shelter, and I live in the land of the Tlingit and the Haida people, I am always reminded that I am on their land.
I hear you.
And so how can I be assertive and proactive in wanting to stir the hearts of the Native brothers and sisters that I have without also hearing the history and also being brought into the shame? So to be aggressive, assertive, and proactive with Native ministries is not creating a symbiotic relationship, because I'm afraid to perpetuate that image. I know I'm going to be told you're a white woman.
Yeah. Now you're getting at adaptive issues. And those are exactly the kind of complexity that we've got to deal with on a deep level. But how many times do we have this discussion on a deep level about Native ministries? Those questions need to be wrestled with. And I agree totally with you. But if they aren't wrestling inside of us, then we're going back to reduce your anxiety and letting the system just roll along as it rolls along. And you've done very well, we've done very well in terms of finances. And so we're just happy little campers until those questions start really bugging us individually and we step out to try to tackle them. Yeah, I'm ready if you guys are too. Go ahead, Mike.
I think that part of the answer to the question of Native ministries being a focus of conversation but not of action and ministry can be found in the analysis that's usually applied to individuals or families. When you say, if you want to find out what the family's real priorities are, you examine the checkbook. And I believe that's true about our institutional priorities as well. And to focus on Native ministry with our resources, primarily thinking our financial resources, we're going to have to start transferring some of our funding into that area of ministry.
Amen, amen. Now that's an active reality. Yeah, David?
My initial thoughts to that sort of question is, maybe I'll talk to you after the session.
Sure,
and
definitely.
I can tell you some of these because I'm afraid of whose toes I might step on and who I might offend if I tell you that I see as perhaps some of the reasons.
Speak the truth.
That's work avoidance, David. That's exactly the example of us being so polite and so nice. And this happens in the Council of Bishops. That's our big dysfunction. We just, oh, we're so polite to each other. We don't offend anybody. And nothing ever gets done because of that. So go ahead and take the risk if you want to. Yeah.
Well, I was going to go on and say that actually is probably part of the problem, but going to what Ev says, there's some cultural values that when we measure things on an efficiency sort of model.
Right.
Well, I know in the NUPAC values and also the UPIC, I'm not sure about all the different groups in Alaska because those aren't groups present in our region, but there are a few things. Respect for elders. You have one elder that disagrees, it's not going to happen. Avoidance of conflict.
Sure.
It's been changed in some of the recent statements of values, but on the older ones it says avoidance.
Sure.
Someone's realized it's unhealthy and said management or avoidance of unhealthy conflict. The other thing is that, I mentioned the elders, and this is very similar, the decision-making process is not democratic, it's a consensus, and until everyone agrees, nothing is going to happen.
Sure.
And when you start coupling this with what Ev is saying about where are the colonists,
Right.
and they're saying you need to adapt your culture if you really want to make progress on this, it gets into some very difficult values. And like you're saying about the Puerto Rican woman saying that that's culturally insensitive, or even worse, that's racist.
Right.
Most of us don't like that, and it's a pretty serious accusation and sparks some self-examination that may cripple some of these efforts.
I hear exactly what you're saying. So what we have here, the diagnosis is a cultural class of values. The values of Native people are not our values. Can we impose ours? No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is we avoid the issue of Native ministries by not engaging it like we're doing today. We just mouth the words that it's important for us. And I think that we're in the zone now. We're getting to the zone. We're not quite into it. We're getting to that zone of truth-telling that we really need to get to, by the way. So I'm going to push you guys for, well, I have been pushing you, but we're going to continue to push on this. Go ahead, Dawn.
So I think you could probably identify some really critical adaptive, some issues that we need to deal with in our conference. So why, instead of dismissing us for 3 hours this afternoon, were we not able to stay together and at least pick maybe our biggest issue and have us all deal at this time that we're all in the same room?
That's not work avoidance, or that's pushing the group to say, will you sacrifice some time in order to deal with some things? Yeah, that's not me, that's all of you.
One hour, that's all, 1 hour.
Oh, well, okay, I own that, but now it's on the group to say, do you want to do this now? That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay, so the authority figure, which is a big part of their problem, is to sit down. And if you think that this is going real well, then what I need to do is sit down and let you all tackle this. That's the way they operate. The adaptive folks operate. So let's try it out. Go ahead, Deborah.
I'm going back to the Native culture. I teach Native culture at the museum in Juneau. Two of the other things in Native culture is sharing and also the care of the land. And what I see in these values that the Native people have, well, guess what? If you look at white culture, we don't respect elders. We look down on people who are older, basically. We don't care for the land. Share, we're more interested in making money. We're not interested in sharing. I mean, as a society, when we look at the society picture, And we don't make decisions by consensus. It's what's best for us. You know, how's it going to benefit me? I mean, we have a total different slant than the Native people look at it. So if we want to start dealing with Native issues, we need to own where our society comes from and think about what we can learn from the Native people.
Years ago, my deceased husband went into Anvik when we first were invited to come in. And he took his culture and in a sense almost demanded that they fit his routine and almost shut down the ministry in Anvik. And what David is saying is so absolute. First of all, I always said, well, number one, I don't have many around me, therefore I'm not called into it. Not me particularly, but in general. So one, we don't always feel called into it because it's not locally around us. Secondly, we don't go with the respect of and often when we do anything we look at it as a charity. We create an atmosphere that they feel dehumanized. And one of the happenings that happened in Kuwait when the military guys were bringing toys to the children, the fathers felt dehumanized because it said to them they couldn't provide for their children. So first of all, I need resources to understand what to do. Secondly, I need to be taught how to enter into their culture with a respect and understanding, and so that they invite me into it.
Okay. There's a seductive part of leadership in this, it's really a seductive part of authority, and that is you're looking to the authority right now to say, well, what do we do? We're at a time bound. I'm not going to do that. It's on you all to figure out what you want to do. Now, we are at a time boundary, but I'm sitting down, and you guys decide what the next step is.
Kind of building on what she said, two interactions come to mind. One is there's been some movement out in the Gamble area with the Nupiaks to apologize for the way we as a church came in with the missionaries, insisted they go to the boarding schools, speak only in English, do away with the drums, all this sort of thing. The other instance that comes to mind is in speaking more in the southeast part, where before you start a meeting, or before you talk, you ask permission from the elder, may I speak on your land? And these are the types of things that we as a church need to do if we want to make any progress of exchanging ideas on a more even basis.
I'm right behind you. And I hope I'm able to say this so that I can make myself understandable. But I have worked with a lot of different cultures from teaching them English. And I am bilingual, so I have put myself in an environment where I was the minority, even though they were white and I'm white. But and I think that what has always impressed me, or not impressed me, but I've always tried to remember, is that I can try to be so cautious and so prepared before I do anything that nothing gets done. And it is a fact of life that mistakes have been made. And it is a fact of life that mistakes will be made from this point on, unconsciously, and they will be filled with sorrow. But the other thing is that we study an issue, we try to learn all there is so that we minimize our mistakes, and we do all that. And 15 years down the road, when our people that are 58 are now whatever they would be, I taught German, not math, but then nothing has happened. So we can either be the bad guys and always try to, the bad guys in our mind, and always try to repair what was done, or we can move forward and say, you know what, we're going to do our very best. And when I work with people from all different cultures, and to the person, I can tell you that they will forgive if you go in there with an open heart and you say, you know what, I am doing my best. And you know, if offense happens, then we deal with it. But doing nothing is not the answer.
I appreciate what Janice just said, and I wanted to just make us mindful of something, even in this room, and some of the things that we've said. A few people have said, you know, we as white people are doing this, and we have a lot of diversity within our I'm looking around and thinking, you know, we need to stop talking about us versus them. We have a lot of us within us. We're not just talking about how do we interact with Alaska Native people. How do we interact with all of us, right? At camp this summer, we have such a diverse group of kids that are coming, and it's easier for me to say, okay, if I've just got one culture that I need to figure out how to train my staff and how to do that would be nice, right? But we don't. We're so diverse here. We've got to like recognize that and not think of ourselves as one thing. We are an us. So let me just say that, and then while I have the microphone, I want to say this as well. Our churches need to be a safe place. Thank you, Bishop, for saying to David, let's talk about this. And sorry, my frame of reference is camp. So when we come to camp, we say, this is a safe place. Whatever you say, it's going to be okay because this is a safe place. And our churches can be that too if we're not afraid, or if we're not afraid of it, and we're willing to apologize, and we're willing to come at it just as people together. And the other thing I want to say is sometimes churches, adults, don't know how to work together. And when I get a bunch of kids together, they're very willing. We get them out there on the challenge course, and we give them challenges to overcome together, and they learn about communication and teamwork and listening. And then I go to a church meeting, and none of the adults there know how to do that. I wonder, I've often thought, I wonder if we could get them all out on the challenge course. And so, while I know you don't all want to climb over things, Stephen and I are both trained, and we have other people who can come do like initiative activities with your churches if you're interested in that. And maybe those are built to do some of the things like where you end up talking about group dynamics and teamwork and communication and what is actually happening within the leadership in our church. So I just want to offer that as something is out there, that as we're working through what do our churches need, sometimes we just need to figure out how to listen and talk to each other.
when I spoke, I should have used the word dominant, because in Filipinos, Samoans, and many other groups, they have the same value system basically that our Native people do. So when I was thinking of the dominant white culture, not overhauled.
I think those of us who are quick to jump to not jump to conclusions, jump to solutions, need to learn how to be comfortable with silence. Before I moved to Nome the first time, I lived in the English, the British culture. And my way of leading is, okay, everybody sits down and get comfortable, take a breath, we think about the question, and then we discuss it. Well, this British lady thought maybe I didn't know what I was doing, but I was a little unsure about myself, and she jumped right in and she took over from me. And that did hurt my feelings a little bit, but I was like, let's just chill. And so we can't just always assume that because someone's not filling the space that work and listening and things aren't happening. So I say we collectively, because we all have our own personalities and such, but I think we need to learn to be comfortable with silence and not think that the solution that we have is right for everybody. And I'm just going to share a real brief story. So, I've spent the last 12 years on and off in Nome, and I hate to admit this, but I do have a bias now against work teams. I really, some of the things that people come in with, like they say to me as a pastor, well, you need to empower your lay people more to do this. You're just doing too much of the work. Well, that tells me that I'm a crummy pastor. And it hurts, especially when I was probably in my third year. And so I'm a little reluctant to welcome work teams into Nome, because I think if they're not making me feel that way, but if I'm feeling that way, I can only imagine what my parishioners are feeling when people come in and say, this is the way we've got to fix this or do this. So just something to keep in mind, the quick, easy solution is not always the lasting or appropriate solution.
Well, I was just going to pick up on it. The other one we've heard all too many times is, how can you live here? But just stepping back to a little before what Julie said, when I say we, I'm not sure we is the wrong term, because in using we, I'm speaking of us as the church. And in the history of Alaska and some of the colonial history, the church played a key role in trying to change the culture of the Native people to being the same as it would be anywhere else in the United States, or probably in the Western world. The purpose of the education system in Alaska, for instance, was to civilize the natives, which meant at a minimum speaking English, being Christian, and holding a 9-to-5 job. The subsistence economy was not viewed as a modern Christian economy. They had to convert to a cash economy. Someone mentioned education. I'd say there's 3 things I would recommend. Anyone who's serious about Native Ministries reading. One would be by Father Michael Alexa, who's probably more known for his intercultural communications. But his doctoral dissertation is called Orthodox Alaska. It's a theology of mission. Another was Richard Haycock's, I think. It's called Alaska and American Colony. The third one is by a guy named Harold Napoleon, and I think it's Yarick, the Way of the Human Being. It gives a lot of the native understanding. And it's written from a Yupik perspective, so it's not the same across all the groups, but I think there are some similarities. But it gives an idea of how the traditional cultures here view the world. And in doing that, I think, Julie mentioned the work teams. One of the ones we had the opportunity to welcome was when Jenny was still a student. There's a group from United that came for seminary immersion, and their professor was David Watson, or the one that came with them. And the question he asked the students one evening, or a statement, is when you come into contact with other cultures, even if it's with the mission of sharing the message of Christ, we have to come and be prepared to be changed ourselves. And as Deborah said, with regards to stewardship, with regards to the independence of the world or creation with one another, there's a lot of things we can learn, perhaps things that are more Christian than our traditional understanding of things might be. I guess the last thing is make sure that the people we're reaching out to are involved in guiding that effort.
When you ask the question of the native elder, is it all right if we hold this meeting on your land? You ought to be prepared to receive the answer of no.
We'll see if I can phrase this correctly. I was just sitting there talking to our intern, Bailey. I'm like, this is the question I should say, but I don't know how to say it. She goes, just go do it. So she's, this is your fault, Bailey, if I don't say this right. When we say that we want to have a focus on Native ministries or ministries with young people, my gut reaction is we're going to strap on God and go take God to them. That's how it sounds to me. And I just want to identify and clarify that hopefully that's not what we mean. And so I would get much more energized if there was new conversations around, because you guys hit on something. That hit me so hard. I don't want to slow down long enough to learn from my Native friends because their way of life challenges me greatly. But I think there's some true God, we need to learn from our Native friends, their way of life. So if someone starts talking about, well, maybe Native ministries focus means how are we, all of our diversity, learning from our Filipino culture? How are we all learning from our Japanese American culture? And maybe in our white Caucasian culture, we have something to offer as well. Oh, I'd get jazzed about those kind of gatherings. And same with young adults. Young adults would have so much to teach us as well. But if it comes at all with an air of, I'm bringing God to you, I don't want to be a part of that. So.
One additional comment I'd like to make is that not only within the church, but in a large variety of areas, we see a problem, we identify the problem, and we plan how to solve it, and we quit. It doesn't matter how good the plan is if there's no execution.
I need to start by asking if I may have permission to speak on your land. serious. As mission interpreter, I feel called upon to say a couple of, I have about a string of things I'd like to say, but I'll say one or two. The first I'd like to say is that we are the people of the United Methodist Church. Almost half of us live in Africa. We live in other countries as well. We speak many, many languages. Some of us are natives in countries where there have been colonialists who come. It's not an insurmountable issue, but obviously it's one you're beginning to deal with, and you've dealt with a long time, I know. I'd also like to lift up the theology of mission statement that I presented to some of you on Thursday night. It's lying out on the table, and it works, and I drafted it with a committee, so it's certain camel-like elements in it that it assumes that wherever you go, God is already there. You don't have to carry him in with you. God has already been at work. God has left God's impact and imprint on the people that you are going to meet, and they may have a message for you. And the third thing I'd like to say is simply to give an anecdote from my work in Europe. I worked in 3 different multicultural, multiracial, multilingual, yes, whatever that is, language congregations. And one of the things I observed in the one that, the second one I served especially, was that as we gathered a group of people who were from different cultures and started to discuss an issue, the Brits and the Americans were always very quick to know the answer and give it immediately at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
After a while, I realized that there were wise people in the circle who had said nothing. Most of them were Africans. And I learned that if I want to know what they think, I need to ask. And when I began to ask them, then they began to have insights that no one else had had. And it was extremely helpful. In fact, the one congregation I served ended up being, when I left, 1/3 Ghanaian, 1/3 British, that's UK in general, Welsh, Irish, English, Scots, each of which is different, by the way. And about 1/4 were Americans, US Americans, Canadians for whatever reason, and a few other people, scattering of people from around the world. This congregation learned, they valued the fact that each of them was different and that they could go to different people from different cultures for different insights. Maybe the native Alaskans of the various groups that I have learned are here, are waiting for you to ask them what it is they would like for you to do with them. And the other thing I would emphasize, ministry with, is the short formulation that's come out of the General Conference's decision in 2008 that GBGM and Yom should emphasize ministry with the poor, and that the result is ministry with. We don't do anything for other people. We do it with them because it's important to them.
Something that I was thinking about while talking about the issue of race, and I'd just like to start off before I go into this by saying I'm 3rd generation English and 3rd generation Yupik, half Canadian person who doesn't fit anywhere. But I do fit here because I'm Methodist. That's what our church can offer to people. That's what I love about being Methodist. So if I take the perspective of, am I going to go into a place and be the ecumenical theological authority, how are they going to receive me? It's not going to work because I represent the church, and that's kind of our thing. Then this situation in Alaska, where the status quo armor is racism. That's my defense against change, because it's so prevalent, and there's no denying that. My thought is, what can I, as a representative of the church, do to serve the people in my community? And if I focus on that, then I can share Christ's love with them in a way that doesn't have to cross cultural boundaries. And that's something that can happen with discussing things in the community. As far as Native American ministry, I can relate. I'm in Oklahoma City right now, and my church is starting a Hispanic ministry. And we have a huge Guatemalan population in my neighborhood, which makes my wife and I uniquely capable of being a part of this ministry, because we're both also Hispanic. What we're doing with this Hispanic, it's called a Hispanic ministry, but what we're doing is we're starting a after-school program, because there's a lot of neglected young people in my neighborhood, neglected because it's a working class neighborhood where adults, mothers and fathers, work, and their children are often neglected due to the high demands of making it. So what we're doing as a church is we're starting an after-school program so that the children will have a place to go and be safe after school while the parents work. And that's all we're offering them. We're hoping that in doing so, that the laity and the clergy might have interactions with the parents to see what we can do from there. Maybe that means inviting them to church. Maybe it doesn't. We're certainly hoping that it can start with small groups meeting in their homes and finding out ways that we can incorporate that into whatever plan it is that we have. So as far as I'm concerned, finding how we can have a missions approach to affecting our community sounds a lot more genuine to my values as a Methodist man.
Well, before becoming a US2, I had done a lot of mission work in the Appalachian Mountain region, and I even in college I was privileged enough to have the opportunity to go to Bo, Sierra Leone, which you saw a video on yesterday, for about 2 weeks, and spent 2 weeks in an orphanage with a lot of the orphans that had their parents killed off in the Civil War. About 15 years prior to me being there. Anyway, so before going on mission work, we would go through these kind of trainings, and that when we go out to these areas, we have to keep in mind that there's tasks for us to do, and to go into these, go to these families respectfully and honor what the objective that we have, because they've been given to us from the families. This is what they've asked for us to do. And so I had no real expectations or really that much knowledge of what NOM had before went into it, but I keep looking up at this banner and seeing open hearts, open minds, and open doors. And personally, I add to that is also open ears and open possibilities. And that we really need to go into pretty much everything, open to the possibility that we are going to be changed. We can't just put up a wall. That we need to challenge ourselves and break out of the comfort zone, because personally for me, if I'm too comfortable with something, I feel like I'm not doing my part. Something is preventing me from progressing. And the Bible is a progressive story. The Israelites fled Rome. Jesus died on the cross. There's so much change going on, and if we don't progress and change inwardly, then we won't be able to change the world outwardly.
I'm watching body language and taking my own internal temperature, and this may sound super insensitive because this is beautiful conversation and sensitive conversation, but I heard that we were tasked with deciding whether or not we were going to have this conversation, and so I see us doing the very thing that we were learning about maybe not doing. And so if we look at treaties with Native Americans, broken treaties, if we look at missionaries coming into Native Alaska with their idea of sharing God's love, I want to suggest that right now we're perpetuating all those violations because we've not decided whether or not we're going to have this conversation. And we're 30 minutes into keeping on, and I see people getting twiddly and coming in and out of the room. And so, beautiful conversation, important conversation. I suggest we decide how we're going to decide if we're going to have the conversation.
You said there's no accountability.
Oh, there's accountability, but it's not by the authorities that you want to do that. Well, it's a great... Oh, Charlie! Yeah, amen. Good to have you with us, Charlie.
I have missed most of this conversation.
You're probably lucky, Charlie.
But if you look in this room, who else beside me are the people you're missioning to? Where are we? I have Facebook friends who are older than I am that take very seriously the issue of church. I have a cousin who feels that the missionaries are the cause of the decline of my people. But take heart. Recently I was at the UN talking about indigenous peoples around the world. And we were talking about act of repentance. And one of the professors who was there from Oklahoma, an Indian person, American Indian, brought out some of John Wesley's journals and pointed out, even that far back, the bias of people who came had. It's not new. If you go to Europe, I'm sure you will find bias from the people on the north side to the people on the south, whether it be Spanish against whomever. But the bias is built in because we don't know enough about the people that you have a bias against. They may do things a little differently. They may stand too close to you. In some instances, in my experience, in grade school, a teacher from New York City who came to Barrow, who talked so fast, many of us could not understand half of what she said. And if she asked a question, if we were too slow in answering, she thought we were dumb. And to the point where if you didn't answer correctly, and asked her back, what did you say? Her question was, did you hear me? So not know enough about what's going on, and not know enough about the differences between you and the people, makes for a big, big gap. But Native ministries, like I mentioned, who else is here besides me? I think in this conference it's dysfunctional. I know what I'd like to see happen. But when I show up at a committee meeting with one other person, another person is a preacher, who is a resource person for the committee, how can we, what do? We have this pot of money that's been sitting there And I don't want to be responsible for saying, send it here and there, because there is no committee to assist me in determining where it goes. And why is that? What have we done to help foster the understanding? It may be that the comedy agreement back in the 1800s could be at fault, but that's so far away. But what do we as a group? What do we as a congregation? What do you as an individual do to make people welcome? It's difficult. And we can point things like, we don't know enough about this, we don't know enough about that. We don't know why we should pay for somebody else's problem. But in an ecumenical group of Native ministers that United Methodists foster, when we have missionaries come to our villages, principally for one-night stands, maybe 2 with the 3 on the outside, and there is no follow-up to whatever the preaching that they do happens, the communities are divided. One week, this brother might be a Baptist. Next week, it might be somebody from Crossroads. Somebody else from another missionary group. It divides families. It divides communities. And with no aftercare built into the system, when people have questions 2 or 3 days after a revival, people are lost. So TV on Sunday morning, NFL, whatever, is a bigger substitute for the wants of those people. It's easier, just click it, it's there. You don't have to go to somebody else's house. And it makes it so easy. There's nobody there to fill that gap. Thanks.
Thanks, Charlie. Well, I've been seduced back to authority figures, so I think Charlie's question is a good one. I think we have started. You guys took charge of starting that discussion. Have we finished? Obviously, Charlie's questions are going to haunt me. So the question is, do they haunt you enough for the next iteration? Which is, what are we going to do? Okay? So why don't we end in prayer? Oh, sure.
I guess my problem is always, how do I approach people without giving them a sense that I think I'm better than they are? You know, we need training or education, maybe not training so much as education. And we can do a lot of that ourselves by just reading and talking to people and stuff, but I don't know what to do.
Okay. It's honest reality, yeah. I don't think we know what to do as a conference either, and that's why this is such an important discussion. Okay? But we're going to leave you there, and that's leaving you with some anxiety. Okay, so it's, again, if we modeled the way the church does it, we'd say something nice and something passive and something comforting. Well, I'm not comforted right now. I'm like really uneasy, disrupted. But that's going to make me change. Does it make sense what this is all about? Okay, so we've got to figure out where we go from here on this one issue. Okay, so let's say a prayer. Oh Lord, you have been with us during this challenging conversation, and we're so appreciative of those folks that have risked coming forward and looking like they don't know the answer, which none of us do, and we admit that readily, but the fact that they are willing to step forward. Spur all of us to the next step, O Lord. Enable us to engage this issue in a depth that is worthy of you and the love you have for all of humanity, for all the cosmos. And help us, O Lord, be uneasy about this so that we may be charged to do something For all this we humbly lay before you on this day. Amen. Thanks, everybody.